Hello, good evening, and great to see you all. Obviously, I am still waiting for Brett. Obviously, he is going to tune in and join me, so I can't wait for that. But if you are joining, we are talking about the 8 dimensions of wellness. So, what it actually means to have that healthy and fulfilling life. Because if it's just based on one thing, then of course we can feel like that's it. But what happens is we have 8 dimensions, so 8 areas, and if all of these areas are in alignment, that's when we can feel the success, the joy, or the good stuff that come with it. But if we're sort of out of alignment, then something's missing and there's a misbalance, then of course that's when we feel unsatisfied, or we think, oh, work sucks, or something like that. So it can feel really unfulfilling. Okay. So, if you are joining and tuning in, you know what to do. Drop in your thoughts, comments, and questions. Obviously, it won't be live too long. And Brett was coming, so he must have got held up. But of course, he will be jumping in. Um, of course, here. Yep, all coming through on my end. So perfect, perfect, perfect. So 8 dimensions of wellness. So, what are the 8 dimensions? So, the 8 dimensions are the physical, the spiritual, the emotional, make sure I get these right, occupational, social, intellectual, environmental, and financial. I always say them in different orders, so I always miss one. But we have all these different elements. And now people can often think that it's not valuable, it's not, we don't need the occupational, or we don't need the financial. But let's think about each one in turn, okay? So we'll start with the financial, okay? So we'll start on something that's kind of obvious and kind of tangible. Because if we don't have financial well-being, then of course it can lead us to be stressed because we can't pay our bills or something like this. But actually we want that sort of fulfilling, that drive, that encouragement, because we don't want to have a trouble paying our bills. We want to have a roof over our heads and good food on our plates, right? So we want to have all of these things, and of course that takes money. Okay, just like if you've ever had credit card debt and all these sorts of problems, then of course it can feel overwhelming. If that's something you resonate, or maybe finances are something you've been working on, I know personally that's been my sort of goal for the last few months, getting ahead and things like this. But again, financial well-being is very, very important. Okay. Now, environmental. So I'm going to go backwards on my list. Okay. Environmental. What's environmental? Well, environmental is literally, as it sounds, it is the environment we are in. Okay. So you often hear this about feng shui. What makes us feel driven, what helps our success, what sort of things we need around us. But when it comes down to our well-being, if we're in an environment that makes us feel stressed, then of course actually it can impact us in a huge, huge way. So for example, for me, clutter is a big thing, but clutter can also be bad for the feng shui of a room. Okay. Now, what we can do is we find things that make us feel good, just like, say, your certain rooms of your house. So if you have a computer in your bedroom, it starts being the place of relaxation, right? So we want to make sure our rooms, our space, the place we work is set for success and allows us the things that we want to achieve. Okay, that's kind of the short version of that. Now, the intellectual is because it doesn't matter how smart you think you have a brain, okay? Bottom line is, regardless of whatever you want to say to yourself, you have a brain in your head, and that wants to be used. Now, each of us has a different mental capacity to each other. So you may be someone who naturally gets numbers, you may be someone who reads very well, you may be someone who's very articulate, okay? Whatever it is your thing. That's yours, okay? Your brain works in a special, unique way that is unique to you, and it wants to be worked in whatever way suits that, okay? So maybe you're someone who's an avid reader, or you're learning, okay? So we do professional development, and these things are so important for us for growth because we like that intellectual challenge. Now, the one thing I found as well, because obviously going into the office, I actually really enjoy going to the office because one has been a huge shifter from the background I've been in. But what also happens is it allows me to, I've got my words, have different conversations. That's what I was going to say. So have these different conversations with people and ultimately join and tune in. So basically, so I'm just seeing if there's any LinkedIn comments coming through because there's nothing coming on my screen. But yes, I've got one. So hi, guys. So I have all these different conversations. Here's Brett. I'm just going to pop him in right now. And actually, Brett, that was a beautiful time pin.
Sorry, technical issue.
I'm going to turn my speaker down because I don't want to give him feedback.
Okay.
How are you doing?
Great. Sorry, I'm a bit late. I had a technical issue, but we're ready to go.
Boom. Well, what I was just doing was going through each dimension of wellness and each one in turn. So just to recap, we hit financial, obviously making sure, because obviously we need financial balance. So for example, paying our bills, we don't want debts, we want to afford clothes, foods, all these things. The environment we live in, so we're also setting ourselves up for the purpose, but also we're not in some way that causes us stress, discomfort, or that sort of thing. Then I went on to intellectual. So of course we all have a unique brain that loves to be supercharged and utilized. And of course that works in a very unique way. So there's the three I've just covered. Are you with me so far?
I'm with you.
Okay, so the next one is spiritual, because whether we say we're religious or not, we all have a spiritual belief. So that may be in being, might say you're realistic, you might say you're Christian, you might be a Muslim, you might be whatever it is. We all have a spiritual side of us. Now that side, when we talk about the 8 dimensions, it doesn't mean to say every single one sits here. You could have spiritual down here. You could say I'm not very spiritual, and then your financials be up here. Everything has to be in balance for you. So it's not one or the other, it's for you. Social, so just like this, Brett, and you get to join me, the social moments. This is so important. This is like crucial. Occupational. So again, this is why, again, Brett, I know this is sort of big for your field. Our career is quite important to us. So we don't get something, I'm sure, guys, if you're listening and this even resonates with you, but if you've ever tuned into something and a job and I'm just ticking the box, there's no purpose, I'm not enjoying it, the money's just covering the ends, it's not really get me forwards, you kind of feel lack of joy going to work. Maybe you turn up late, maybe you just poor performance and you're scamming whatever you can, maybe you're taking toilet roll from the toilets, whatever it is. Okay, so when we have an occupation that gives us a drive or hits to our why for somehow, then of course it actually helps us feel fulfilled. Okay, the next one is physical, because generally speaking, physical health, we need to be physical, take care of our bodies. And then the last one is emotional, because we talk about the mind, our intellect, but of course our emotions, how we feel, our heart is super important. So if we feel like we've been neglected, we're feeling lonely, we're not feeling connected, again, it connects to social very, very well. Then of course we can feel out of balance. So that's all 8. That's all 8. You with me, Brad?
Yes, it's a comprehensive list. You're definitely the expert in this area, but I've been looking forward to having this conversation with you, and we'll certainly share. I think the audience could maybe benefit from what I've been through various stages in my life. I'm 60 years old now, so I've been through the young kid aspect. I've been through the corporate domestic, that particular gig. I've been through the international gig as well, living around the world, different cultures, sleeping on airplanes, which was often my hotel room, and the hotel was only used for a shower when I landed and had to get to the office. So now, starting in 2016, going from all of that to caretaking for elders, for family, and now entering and living the next phase of my life, which is retired from all of that corporate chaos and doing something different to keep my mental acumen and physical acumen and the other spiritual, the other aspects that you're mentioning alive. So happy to talk about it through the various lenses that I've been through personally in my life, Liz.
Well, what you've actually highlighted is something really valuable probably without even realizing, is that at different stages of our life, the balance we need changes. And
exactly.
Certain times we need to be more on the occupational, maybe we need more intellectual. Like when we're growing up as teens, intellectual is going to be a much bigger side of us than, say, financial. But what we do in life is we we that's why we have this change and adaptability. So what you've actually said is actually really useful, because you've gone through different stages, different
Yeah.
changes of going, I've hit retirement, I need to change, I need to slow down, I'm this is I'm not so worried
Reinvent,
about.
reinvention. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
And of course, when we're in our career, so when we're in our business, obviously the intellectual is important, our occupational
Hmm.
is important. We also hit hard on the social, the financial, and of course environmental, because how many times have you ever worked in a place that you didn't enjoy the environment?
I have. And that was, I think, instrumental in my success because I learned what not to be like.
Yeah.
Okay. And oftentimes those are more powerful. And I'll share a really short story around that particular point,
Mhm.
because environment and work often don't mix well with a lot of people if you look at their happiness indicators, whether
Mm.
you measure that through customer lenses or employee lenses, and otherwise known as culture. I call it ecosystem.
Mhm.
But I spent the first 19 years of my career with a global U.S. bank,
Mhm.
Citicorp at the time, Citibank, and then later Citigroup.
Mhm.
And this is, everybody's familiar with it, I think, around the world. And I benefited and contributed enormously to Citi during that time. Superstar, very successful and everything. And then I received a call to go to join a British bank over in your neck of the woods. And I was in Asia at the time for a number of years. And it was with Barclays Bank, which is
Mhm.
one of the big four UK banks. They call it high street banks over in your country. And so initially I was hesitant, but I was talked into it and enticed in various ways, not just money, but by the challenge of leading 2,000 plus people,
Mhm.
which was something I had not done in the 19 years. Anyway, let's get to the crux to why I'm telling this part of my journey. I get over there to the UK, and I had worked in different countries, different cultures, so that part was okay.
Mhm.
Language, I spoke English, right? So that part was okay. Culturally, understood quite a bit more easygoing in the UK than places that I'd lived before, especially Asia. Fast
And
paced Asia, UK, slow it down. The new year does not start on January 2nd in the UK. It kind of, takes its time and a couple weeks. And I remember one January 2nd, Liz, when I lived in the UK, a funny story. I show up in the office January 2nd, typical American a person ready to kick off the new year, and nobody's at the office. It's like, where is everybody at? I had to look at the calendar, and the calendar, it was not it was not a holiday,
yeah.
but basically everybody was gone. I was naive in that. Anyway, getting through all of that, what I learned a few months into the job, Liz, back to your point, is that people were not responding to actions that I was doing that I had done successfully for 19 years.
Mhm.
And the root cause of that was that I was basically maturing in a culture for 19 years that
Mhm.
was its own self-contained ecosystem. And then I jumped to another ecosystem, which was completely different. It didn't have the support mechanisms. It
Mhm.
didn't have the types of processes in place as well. And it relied heavily on leadership. What I learned was that I was the one with the problem, that I didn't have the leadership. I had the management. So if
Mhm.
you use like in a smartphone to this, right? You've got hardware and software. I had
Mhm.
the hardware, but not the software.
Yeah.
And the software was required. So I had to, we'll save it for another conversation. But basically, I've learned the fact about environment not being right, because I was like a freshwater fish in
Mhm.
saltwater, and
Mhm.
it doesn't mix very well, right? So, but I learned through great leaders, through an open mind, and knowing that I needed to evolve. Not the entire country of the United Kingdom did not. It was not going to evolve around me, right?
Good luck.
I needed. There's a bit more historical advantage that the UK has there, but But all joking aside, I did learn that. It was a rough 10 months, but I did learn the fact that, you know what, in order for this thing to work, it's not a hot shot hardware, beautiful piece of equipment. It's what's inside also. And you've got to have both, right? And so I can really succeed in this environment if I learn that software is required. And I had to build the software. Examples being culture, examples being teams instead of tasks. I was really good at tasks and teams. Instead of processes all the time, maybe focus more on people. Those kind of soft skills that I really learned. And so back to your point, yes, I have felt through the threat of losing my job via poor performance in that UK, shifting over to the UK. And it turned out that I was in the UK for 3 years, and 2 of the 3 years I was not just successful, but ultra successful, because I had learned how to actually not only adapt to environments, but to actually shape them. So, that was very important to me as well. And if you get back to the fish tank analogy, that I learned in that assignment about environments, and that environment is that it's not that you're a freshwater fish going in saltwater, but if you really understand this, you learn how to change the water so that you can accommodate all types of fish. And that's something that's kind of a rare skill that even today, a lot of people haven't really figured out. They just figure out, well, you know what, if we've got freshwater fish, let's just get rid of them and hire more saltwater fish. But what if you change the composition of the water? And that's really what environments are all about.
Yeah. But also what you've linked onto there is the social side, because although the environment changed because the dynamics were different, the soft skills you're talking about, like people, because this is where we talk about the balance and how things shift. Because in the one role, you're like, actually, I've got this working, I've got this working, I've got this working. And then you go somewhere else and you're like, oh, my environment isn't quite right balance. I'm not here on my social either, because if I was, I would be asking a question, listening, and we would move forward very dynamically. But if I'm so much on systems, I'm much more on the intellect and occupational. So this is where we talk about balance. Actually, that's a beautiful example. I love the word beautiful. It's my favorite word this week.
Yeah. And we have to, and it was rough, Liz. I mean, it was really, this story I told, it's easy to tell it in hindsight now. That was the year 2006 through 2009.
Yeah.
And that's when something called the global financial crisis hit, in the middle of all of that. So I'm sitting here having to learn what in the world is software, in the middle of, the world crumbling down around us. And I worked in financial services in banking and wealth management. So with all of that happening, we had quite full plates, and it was definitely baptism by fire. But that oftentimes is the best way to learn, if you have an open mind and are willing to reinvent yourself. And it's no different than Tiger Woods reinventing his swing at the top of his game. If you look back at his career and all the wonderful things that man did, everybody was saying, this is crazy. Why in the world would he reinvent his swing? He's number one in the world. Well, he knew that the equipment was changing, and he knew also that he was stronger actually over time. And if he didn't change that swing, he was going to go down really quick. So he understood that reinvention of yourself as well.
Well, actually, there's a few more examples on the reinvention, because if we look at like Michael Schumacher, we look at Christopher Reeve, who's Superman in the past.
Yeah.
Both of them have accidents. So going into the physical side, because obviously there's still, there's moving on to the next one. The physical elements, like a lot of us get injured at some point, whether in our careers or whether it's like for them, that was their, kind of thing. And people obviously automatically assume, they're like, okay, what am I? What can I do?
Yeah.
Because something's taken away. Like when you lose same as if you lose your job, you get made redundant or for some reason, or roles terminated, or
that happened to me. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Terminated or injured.
Well, I mean, minor injuries. So I'm not going to claim to be to have gone through anything significant or any significant health issues. I'm not going to claim to do that. But in a corporate sense, maybe you have me on here for a lot of my extensive corporate experiences. Yeah, I've been made redundant in 1998. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make a video about this soon. I went to lunch one day. This is in San Francisco, 1990, 19 early 1998, and I came back and this thing was left on my chair after lunch, and it was a redundancy package. Now it's one thing to say you talk about HR not doing things the proper way. I had been with a company 12 years at the time, and I come back from lunch and I find out I'm redundant through a piece of paper or a folder saying you've been made redundant. That's not a very good healthy ecosystem for those watching. But what happened was that fast forward I quickly got a phone call with the same company, ironically, from somebody that knew my performance track record. And a few months later, I launched an international career in Asia with the same company. Okay, so I quickly had to learn. Okay, well, Asia, that ought to be. It's kind of like the U.S. Ought to be okay. Ought to be easy. I get over there, and after about 10 days, understood not only was Asia quite different than the U.S., but every country in Asia, and there were 12 of them, they're all different. So I had to quickly learn how to reinvent the way I communicated. I needed to talk slower. I needed to listen a lot more, and then formulate actions. Because if you, in Japan, for example, if somebody hands you a business card and you take that business card like you would in America and you lay it on the table, you have just insulted that person for life. Okay. It's no different because the business cards in Asia, generally speaking, especially in Japan, they're sacred. So you are to hold that business card and look at it as you're talking to the person. It's a sign of respect. And that's just a tiny example. There's 100 other examples like that I needed to, I need to come up the curve very quickly, or I'm going to wind up getting another one of these on my chair, but not redundant, but for performance. And so I think that building the resiliency involves an open mind and being able to understand that, as you just said a few minutes ago, Liz, as things change, we have to also adapt to it. Using Bruce Lee, be like water, my friend, something like that, right? That we have to learn to adapt to the water in this teacup, right? And we have to be very much that way as well as we go through different conditions and situations in our lives.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, because obviously I'll make sure we cover as much as possible here without going on for hours and hours and hours. And as you can tell, this topic could be huge.
Days.
Days would be afraid. When we talk about like being out of balance, because obviously we know, for example, when we're early in our career, so if you're someone who's early in the careers, maybe in your 20s, you're pushing hard, you want the promotion, you haven't got the family yet, but somehow you hit that point of going, I'm hating work because I feel out of, we say we want work-life balance because you feel like you're working later, you're pushing extra hours, you're doing more and more, but actually it's alignment rather than balance. And that can happen later as well, because you can go, okay, I've suddenly got snowballed under debt, or I've just come through a big breakup, or I've done redundancy. So, you throw yourself into something completely. Let's talk about how it feels to be in that state and sort of what to do to come out of it. So obviously you've said, obviously there was a time you felt that way. So let's talk about how it feels to be in that state and why does this become so common? Because a lot of us hit this at some point.
They do. And that's where I'm hoping that people that follow you, Liz, and people that are watching us right now, I'm hoping that we can save them maybe decades in their life journey, right? And maybe even save some lives, right? So you're right. So to answer your question, it feels like, you're living on adrenaline. I was oftentimes living on adrenaline. I would, like, as I mentioned at the beginning, I would take, I used to love the Singapore to Korea flights because it was 6 hours. I could get a decent night's sleep. Japan was 7 hours. But if I would take a late flight from Singapore to Manila, it's only a few hours, right?
Yeah.
And or to Hong Kong, it's not enough time to get that full night's sleep. And you start to find that or I found, we're talking about me. I was running on caffeine and
Mhm.
adrenaline. And it was, oh God, I got to make it. The flight's delayed. How am
Mhm.
I going to make the 10 o'clock meeting? Right. And I have a country team. I had a regional job. I have a country team depending on me to be there. Right. So, and things are beyond my control. I don't control it. You fly into Tokyo Narita Airport, and a taxi is $350 to get to central Tokyo. So you don't take a taxi.
Yeah.
What you do is you take the train, which is much more efficient. But even with the train, it's an hour and a half or so, maybe 2.5 hours before you can get to the hotel, take a shower, and go in. Anyway, the point is you're running so fast all the time, and you
Mhm.
have to keep delivering, and you cannot afford to drop the ball. That's reality. So, what do you do to keep your sanity during this? To make sure that you don't just run yourself into the ground or have a heart attack?
Mhm.
and and I so a few things that I did then, I wish now I would have done more. I was lucky because nothing happened to me health wise, but I was probably at high risk for that, right? Just because of the lifestyle that we had. But what you do is you learn to make sure you get some sleep,
Mhm.
make sure you, as my career, as time went by, I made sure that I didn't accept jobs that were east west travel,
Mhm.
because then you go across time zones more.
Yeah.
And I would always make sure it was north and south,
Mhm.
right? So when I was in the Middle East, and my wife and I lived in Dubai, on the water, beautiful place, but I was commuting down to southern Africa, down to Zambia. It was north and south, so your time, the time, the body clock doesn't go through as much. So you learn little things like that. So you because you have to run hard, you don't quit,
Mhm.
but you make you make fine-tune adjustments to what
Mhm.
you're doing. Because I can tell you, this flying across time zone thing made an enormous difference as to how I felt. You also make sure you take your weekends, you shut down on the weekends, because
Mhm.
during the week, I remember being in Singapore and New York. I had one boss in locally and a boss in New York, and the call was at 2 in the morning Singapore time,
Mhm.
because the New Yorkers wanted to do it on their watch, right? And I remember just sitting on a couch, almost falling asleep, on conference calls, because I was tired and I had to be in the office the next day at 7. So
Mhm.
you learn to make sure you eat, make
Mhm.
sure you exercise. Did I do that during the work week? I did not, and wish I would have. Now it's totally different. I do it
Mhm.
7 days a week, right? I've already done my 11 kms today. It's great, but I could not have done this back then,
Mhm.
right? Um, so you learn to try to compensate where you can, going that way. But now, knowing like your 8 wellness, the topics that we're talking about today,
Mhm.
Liz, I think people that can take those into account and become conscious of those, and to reach out and to seek expertise. I didn't have anybody during this journey I could
Mhm.
reach out to, just because digital media like we're doing right now wasn't really available. And I just didn't have that, didn't think I needed it. I was Superman, right? And being able to do it this way. But you start to learn. And well, one thing was my eyesight. Okay.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong. But when I started to, I don't know, I hit 40 or so, I needed reading glasses. I remember
Mhm.
I was sitting in the Shangri-La, Hong Kong, and I was looking at the menu. I just flown in, and looking at the menu for dinner, and I said, it's really hard to read this thing. And anyway, that was the start when I became conscious that maybe I need reading glasses. And then
Yeah.
guess what? I got reading glasses. It was great. And then I was in denial. I'm not going to do this because that means I'm getting old here. But you learn to embrace your environment,
Mhm.
things that you can't control, like your eyesight, for example, right? And then you learn, and then as you start to mature, you learn to look at other things so that you don't develop major health issues as well. And now the day-to-day life that I live, again, due to a change in environment, because
Mhm.
I can afford to do my 11 km a day, to
Mhm.
do intermittent fasting of 24 every day, and
Mhm.
prolonged fasting once a month for 72 hours. Start the next one tomorrow. I
Mhm.
can afford to do these things because I know that I want to extend my health span,
Mhm.
not my lifespan. And I didn't even know what the difference between those two things
Mhm.
were until a couple years ago. So I think that our priorities change as time goes
Yeah.
by and the environment change. The environment's really a big thing now that I'm talking to you, thinking about it, because it dictates so much of the choices that we make.
Yeah, it does. And this
Yeah,
is when we say, talk about all eight, everyone automatically will go, yeah, physical, yeah, I've got mental, I've got emotional. But actually,
yeah.
when we look at the other things that are so
Mm,
deeply rooted with us, like you're saying, everything connects to the environment,
it
time of
does.
life, age, all that sort of stuff that goes with it. And also how we change. You've also said, obviously, you do intermittent fasting, all this, but you've also found things that work for you in balance.
Right.
Okay. So obviously,
Yeah.
Kim's just put in preventative cure. Yeah. Preventative care. Sorry, I read that
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, Kim
but
understands this, that you get
yeah.
to the root. She's an expert in tackling the root cause of
Mhm.
problems and obstacles in businesses, right? So that you
Yeah.
can get a lifetime value. But yeah,
Yeah.
you learn how to, and you don't avoid, you
Yeah.
don't avoid reality. You embrace reality, and you say, okay, what can I do about this? Hey, maybe all this stuff I'm doing now, maybe it won't make a difference, right? But at least I won't
Mhm.
have any regrets. I did
Yeah.
everything that I could.
Yeah. And that will be always often, I can do it later, especially when we're young. I can do it later. It doesn't matter right
Right.
now. And then, of course, we feel like, okay, we're tired all the time, or we haven't got quite the job we want, or there's something not quite right. But then we're chasing a lot of the time rather than actually
Yeah.
going, hang on a second. I'm going to the gym because I need this great body. But actually, if I went to the gym 3 times a week rather than 5 or 6, I could actually achieve greater results because my body would repair and recover. I
Yep.
wouldn't lose sleep. I would be able to let my body recover. Then I would actually have more energy through the day. So actually, I would be performing better at work. So my occupation would improve. And I would also have a social life because instead of getting up and canceling my night out or,
Hmm.
whatever, it would be so much more balance. And often we kind of go all in on something and
Right.
we push something to one side.
You're right. We do go all. That's a great point, because life is not about going all in on one thing,
Mm.
because you're going to quickly create let's call it a disruption in another part of your life, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you go all in on work. Maybe your personal life's going to go to shambles, right? So I think that I was actually talking with Kim about this yesterday on one of her posts about putting all your eggs in one basket. You should never do that. However, there are always exceptions to that, right? And those exceptions can be that, okay, well, in a certain situation, right, like the famous one is Kodak, right? In a famous situation where Kodak was well aware of digital photography, right?
Mhm.
They even had somebody working on it that came in to present to the board, but they didn't focus enough on the horizon. So sometimes you can have your eggs, different eggs in the basket, but if you're not really focused on the dynamics, and again, it's an
Yeah.
exception more than the rule, then you wind up like
Yeah.
Kodak. That's a big corporate example, but same thing can happen with your health, right? If you don't get any sleep, right? And if I would have continued like I was doing on 3 hours sleep on an airplane, it's not very sustainable at any age, right?
And then we get things like, obviously we've all been through COVID, we've all had sickness. I can't go to
Mm.
work because I am sick, right? Or I can't
Right?
go to the gym because I'm sick, or I'm canceling my night out, or something happens. And this is one of the conversations I've had with my team is
Mm.
actually wellness isn't one thing. So just because you can't get to the gym's shut, or whatever it is, Christmas Eve, I was like, you could still go out for a walk. You could actually connect with a friend. Oh, you're saving money for a holiday. Why don't you use the parks and, like I said, walk and talk, these sorts of things.
Hmm.
So we can actually just shifting. So although this is why when people say, what do you do in the morning? You should be doing this. I was like, okay, I meditate, I journal. Sometimes I do a workout because I go, okay, my body wants to move this morning.
Right.
But it's kind of allows you, if you stay, it's the fluidity. I'm not sure we talked
It
about
is,
fluidity.
it is fluidity because it's real life, right?
Yeah.
And real life happens. And again, that's where resilience comes into
Yeah.
play. And knowing that there's not, I'm going to make a video about this later today on my LinkedIn, but there's no silver bullet. Okay. There's no one way. If you do this, you will get that. That life doesn't work that way. There's always an exception. I learned this in Japan for 6 years. The Japanese that culture focuses on the 0.0001% of things that can go wrong. And as a result of that, they get quality
Yeah.
instead of just cooking spaghetti and seeing if it sticks to the wall, right? That's not Japan. It's quality. I remember my wife telling me when she called me one day and she was at the apartment. I was at work, this in Tokyo, and she said, "Brett, there's 12 people at the apartment. They want to inspect it." Anyway, come to find out, that's Japanese society. There's not a specialist, there's not a generalist, it's a specialist society.
Yeah.
One person was there for the light bulbs, another for the window seals, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, different cultures, you learn different things about it this way, but you have to be aware of the environment. And then you adapt, you learn these things, and then you can share them with that as well. And that's why I would just say, I've known you, Liz, now for a few years, right? That people should reach out to you because you understand these 8 aspects, right? And you can save people years. I wish I would have known you back earlier, right? Then maybe my health span would be longer. I don't know. So I have to kind of recover from that, right? Yeah.
But let's close on one final point now, and thanks for the
Sure.
compliment. Thank you.
Well earned. Yeah.
Because the one key point that we've both gone over here is about the personal balance. By the way, I'm playing my stress ball. I kind of. Okay, so anyone knows anything about me, I do get stage fright at times on cameras, and I actually found by having something in my hands generally thing, but when I start talking, it becomes a distraction. So I put my toy down. Anyway, a finding about balance for us, okay? Because like we said, you've said, okay, I do intermittent fasting, I do this is how my life works for me. Because not everybody will work with intermittent fasting. Like, for example, I did a 12-12. It was great for clearing out the toxins of my body, but then I was also finding I got so hungry. It actually made me hungry. I could sped my metabolism up so fast. Then actually, I would do a week. Actually, I think I did 2 weeks. But at 2 weeks, I was like, I'm gnawing on myself and I'm eating 6 meals in my 12 hours and snacks. I physically can't eat anymore. So let's talk about obtaining balance for you.
Yeah, exactly. And it needs to be tailored. It's like a suit, right? It's like a dress. It's like, the tailored approach is always best, right? Because it fits well, it feels good, it looks good, makes you more confident. Rather than getting something off the rack that may not be quite the fit, it just doesn't, feel good. That's probably a horrible analogy, but the point is, it's our life, and we have to tailor our life to what works for us. And yeah, I mean, something like intermittent fasting is not for everybody, right? But maybe somebody that wants to realize some of the benefits of health benefits. Maybe they don't do intermittent fasting, but they just skip a meal, or maybe what they do, they cut out the alcohol. Or maybe they cut back on the caffeine. Maybe the point is, to your gym analogy, maybe just do something, right? But don't sit there and eat Twinkies all day and wonder, why am I not losing weight? And then you have no energy, right? So the point is, there is I have a doctor friend. He's a urologist that we went to college together, and he was out here in Las Vegas, I don't know, a couple of months ago. And I said, hey, what do you think about this intermittent fasting? He said, the cavemen were very wise. And then I noticed something that Bill Ackman, the big hedge fund manager, posted on Twitter, on X last week. And he showed a picture of 1950s, from the 1950s in New York. Everybody was thin. And his point was, you all can go back and look at his post, and it's a fascinating. There were no spas, day at the spa. There was no, do these luxury things and go have tea, afternoon tea. People were trimmed, they were fit, and it was related to their lifestyle. So what I've learned, Liz, and what I think my advice to people would be, back to your point around tailored approach, do what works well for you. Don't be stupid, right? But there's enough information out there. Learn about it and do something. Okay. And the best thing to do is to consult with somebody that actually knows what they're doing, because they understand the pros and cons, and it's a much better way than just googling and trying to figure out what the heck is going on, right? Talk to experts that way, because sometimes, not sometimes, all of the time, this is the secret to my life today, and it has been since adulthood, is giving something up today to have greater peace of mind tomorrow is a winning formula. That works so well with me. So, and it's intermittent fasting. It's not all about that. It's not all about going for 11 km today. It's about what works well for me, and knowing I better sacrifice something today in order to get something better tomorrow. And don't be stupid with that. But, that's kind of my formula for this.
Well, that's really important, because we said it before about devices. There's so much the instant gratification. I can go, if I'm lonely, I can go on a dating app. If I want some entertainment, I go on Instagram or TikTok. If I want, a quick meal, I can just go and order it. And it's so much at the click of a button that actually we get so used to having something as quick as possible that actually so as you said, it's not about getting the result now and going, okay, I've done this, so where is it? It's like you put something in the oven, you wait for it to bake or cook, or
That's right. And just some advice here if there's Gen Zs watching it. Look, I would never be one to say you need to get rid of this device, because it ain't going to happen, right? So, but the point is, what are you using this device for? And this device, this is my advice to Gen Z and maybe Gen X a little bit, the people living inside this thing. This thing is in a library. I may be a dinosaur. Yes, there are still libraries today, but when I grew up, you went to the library to do a little bit of reading in the summer when school wasn't in session. You would check out a book or two, and then you have to bring it back after 3 or 4 days. But this is a library. So the time that you're in this thing, right? What are you scrolling, or are you learning something? And one tip that I'll give people, this is the tip. Pick 5 people and spend 30 minutes a day for 5 days going through their history. Learn everything you can about that person and look for patterns of what makes them successful. What do they talk about? Now, you got to make sure you pick the right 5 people, and don't pick people just like yourself. Look for people that are different, right? Brett and Liz are totally different, right? So study Liz and go back. The history's all there. Go back, study it, get out your notebook, write down the key trends and themes that this person's talking about. Learn from them. And this will start to change the way you think about the world. But this is what you should use this thing for, not just scrolling. So use it more, but use it as a library. Yeah.
Valuable. Well, thank you, Brett, for being my valuable dinosaur. I think you're valuable. I'm
A few of us still exist. Yeah.
But guys, if you have tuned in, and thank you for the comments that have been popping up, you guys are totally awesome. Do catch up with Brett. So if you're on LinkedIn, I have dropped in the comments, and catch his other shares, his little videos that come out. He always got great journal entries. They're always great to watch, and there's always tips, reminders, and all sorts. So it doesn't matter whether you know this stuff. Those reminders alone are so helpful.
And by the way, here's a bonus tip for everybody, all generate. Keep a journal, okay? Back in 1988, I had the opportunity. There you go. I had the opportunity to go to a Jim Rohn seminar. And those of you that don't know who Jim Rohn is, he was Tony Robbins' mentor, right? And he said one thing in this seminar. He said, keep a journal, write it down. And you know what? Being the naive little kid that I was, 1 year into my career in 1998, I said, oh, kind of like a Forrest Gump thing. He said, write it down. I'm going to write it down. Well, I did it every day for 30 years, right? 29 years. And just jot down what you learn every day in a book and put that book. I've got 89 of them here at the house, right? And 89 over 29 years. And my LinkedIn post, almost all of them, 99% of them come from these journals. So they're the right way and the wrong way to handle things, but they're my way. And again, admittedly, they're not always the right way, right? And so, but keep a journal. No matter how old you are, you will never regret it.
Okay, do you want to hear some really cute about? Okay, mine's generally gratitude or intentions for the day, so it's always uplifting, right? But
great.
You can see it's got puppies on it. Okay, this is
I love it.
On each page. Oh, I dropped a page out of it. On each page, there's a little doggy.
Yeah.
So what I do is I actually name the dogs. So if I've had an engagement with somebody that day, if I've met someone new and had an uplifting conversation, so Brett, you're about to be today's puppy.
Fantastic. Good. I'm honored.
You're a little dash hound. Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is what I do. And then I write it in. So sometimes I do it in the morning, sometimes in the evening. I'm doing it tonight for today because I've been, I went to the gym this morning, so I switched up my day. But you are now named in my little journal.
Awesome.
Oh, and it's a case special. Of actually, because I've done this, it's also helped me remember people's names.
That's a great idea. That's
because I've gone idea. To. So here's a last tip from me, guys. I know I was closing this off, but memory is a lot of time by repetitive. So, like for example, if me and Brett were introducing, Brett goes, "Hi, I'm Brett." I go, "Hi, Brett. I'm Liz." There's a repetitiveness. But also then I went home that day because I met that person. I wrote the name down. I've actually got people's names in here that I go, I remember meeting them. So, of course, when I see them, I go, oh, I remember you. You're a little Dalmatian or something like this. And we have this really little moments.
Exactly. And just imagine 20 years from now when you thumb back, right, to this as well. It becomes really powerful then, not only to other people, but especially to yourself, right, and very meaningful. So it's very powerful. Keep a journal, keep it daily. It doesn't have to be on some fancy software. It can be in books, right? But just whatever works for you, but just kind of do it, right?
Yeah. And the fact that obviously I found a puppy one, but again, the fact, if you do something that helps you remember, that strengthens your memory as well. So we talked about the intellectual. That's a great way to actually boost your brain. And like I said, I wanted a puppy one because it was the one I liked. And it turned out to have illustrations. So it actually helped my memory, my gratitude, my happiness. And it takes less than 3 minutes a day.
Yeah, Liz, maybe another time we could get on here and talk about the mental aspect of this as well. I mean, we could talk for days, but I have friends my age that I went to college with that they retired and then they passed away shortly after.
Yeah.
Good friends. And they did that because their brain just stopped and they then developed the health issues that were probably developing before. They accelerated, right? And it was all because they worked so hard to get to retirement, but then when they got retired, they didn't know what to do with their time and with their energy and their brain, and it impacted their health in a negative way. So folks, you've got to constantly do things to keep that muscle. Your brain is a muscle, right? I think
yeah, that's what I said.
It is. You got to keep working it out, right?
If you talk technically, then no, because obviously it's a different structure. It's not the same structure as a muscle. So if you're along the technical term, but if you're talking to how it functions, it needs to be worked as well as it needs to be rested. So yeah, it's a muscle.
I'm glad you raised that here because I think that's important for people of all ages to hear.
So yes, okay. So now, guys, we are going to close. Me and Brett are going to come back in a couple of weeks. So next week I am live with the fabulous Shay. So we are talking I can't even remember what the subject is about, but yes, I'm live next week with Shay, so do jump in and tune in. Otherwise, have a fabulous rest of your day, and thank you, Brett, for being my wonderful dinosaur.
You're welcome. And thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Liz. Always a pleasure. Count on my support.